Hey, it's Drybear. Continue our series of covering every single weapon in the First Descendant, and today we're talking about what is possibly the coolest looking weapon in the game, the ultimate level Blue Beetle. And this is the base default Blue Beetle. The grip will change colors and glow. It looks like a Protoss weapon mixed with a Terran weapon. It just looks so cool. It's one of my favorite weapons visually in the game. So this is a scout rifle, an ultimate level scout rifle, and something to be aware of when it comes to this is that its passive will not affect the weapon's DPS at all, but it has great synergy with any skill-based Descendant build that relies on skill crit. This goes up to 30% skill critical hit rate. It is multiplicative, unlike things like the Final Masterpiece. You don't get the additive value of skill critical hit rate, but it does give you a multiplicative scalar. So if you're running like a Valby build or something that relies on skill crit, you actually get some good value. Here, it's just not going to change the damage of the weapon itself, so we're not going to include that in our calculations this time. It also has a passive that allows you to cleanse debuffs on yourself. As of right now, you can run immunities for all of the debuffs that are elemental in the boss fights, which are the biggest problems anyway, so you don't really need this, but it could be in the future that we get a new Void Intercept or a new Colossi that has some nasty debuff that's not an elemental damage dot. And then this purification effect becomes super useful. Having self-cleanses on offensive abilities is a big thing in a lot of other games, and it makes sense here, especially if we get some really nasty effects that we can't remove with some other modules, that sort of thing. So keep in mind, this is a great weapon to use as a Descendant-focused, skill-based build with this on top of it. But today we're going to talk about how to use the weapon effectively overall, and since the passive doesn't affect that, we're not going to talk anymore about it. So what's cool about this weapon is it's basically a slightly better Silly Weeper. We talked about the scout rifles and we talked about the Silly Weeper being the best scout rifle overall, very high damage. And what's great about scout rifles is they have very far effective range. So they're perfect for frenzy states in Colossi where you have to very quickly destroy a weak point from a distance. You can just get far away, switch to your Silly Weeper or your Blue Beetle, take it out real quick and switch off. And it's just overall, just an overall better Silly Weeper from that state. They have decent fire rate. They can be affected by sharp precision shot if you wanted to, so you can have that extra bonus going for you there, and you can also get some nice effective firearm attack from many other buffs on top of it. Now, as always, I love giving people options. That's why I have this format set up the way that it is. You can actually see what weighting each mod will have when you use it correctly and what the overall DPS will be. The simulated DPS, maximum DPS for this weapon is 797, which does put it ahead of weapons like Eternal Willpower, close to Tamer, and even things like Assassin's Edge or Silly Weeper in that case. So it's definitely, even just baseline without a passive, one of the best, if not the best scout rifle that you can run until we run the other scout rifle just to test how that goes. But overall, very good, scales well with crit, scales very well with weak point, and it's very easy to hit weak point with this kind of weapon. The general combo that we can't get rid of, real life fighter, action and reaction, rifling reinforcement, and fire rate up are going to be here. Super easy value scaling from that. But you'll notice that sharp precision shot does get pretty close to real life fighter. So if you feel like you're not the best at hitting weak points, sharp precision is an excellent swap out. You will lose a little bit of theoretical top end DPS, but again, if you're not hitting weak points consistently or you don't want to hit weak points consistently, just swap out real life fighter for sharp precision. It works great on this weapon. So does mental focus, and the great part about mental focus is you do get value without having to like constantly fire. So if you want to run mental focus for that reason, it's actually pretty close. All three of them are kind of fighting for that top spot in this case. If you have great accuracy, real life fighter wins out. But if not, they're all pretty good, and we don't get that option very often. In fact, most weapons in the game have to run real life fighter. Even if they only get a couple stacks on it, it's still better than the other option, which is just sad to see. Action reaction, very high value here, and we're gonna be able to see that kind of build up as well. Rifling reinforcement, slow art, elemental conductor, you'll see all the values on the left side scaling up from that front as well. So we have some really good value from these as they stack up. Stat priority is really straightforward, firearm attack, elemental damage on the elemental enhancement versus weakness, weak point, fire rate, crit damage, crit chance, reload rounds, and then the bonus attack is going to be your highest versus Colossi. I recommend running this with Colossi. Again, these weapons are so perfect for that exact moment that I talked about, where you're fighting a Colossi, they aggro a frenzy state, or they have a weak point. You can just go to the back of the arena and just pick away at it, destroy it very easily. from a safe distance. You have to worry about mechanics, get it done, and then move on to the next phase and get back to your normal weapons for doing your normal upfront damage. But just like the Perforator and a lot of the impact rounds, there is another option for you, and this is going to be a quick swap build. So if you run the Blue Beetle as a sidearm, which means that you don't run it as your main weapon and you don't plan to have it out for very long, it opens up other opportunities to run some of the very time-limited, low uptime modules in the game, things like Special Sight or more like weak point expansion that make the build a lot more interesting from that standpoint. Now, we talked about this with the Perforator. You can even run this with Nazacer's Devotion, but a lot of these impact weapons, you can run what is a quick swap build. And what I mean by this is that you can get a nice increase in your overall DPS on the target and burst DPS as long as you don't plan to use the weapon for more than a single magazine. So if you just want to swap to the weapon, unload, like, you know, Colossi kneels, you switch to it, you unload on the weak point, then you switch off, go back to your main weapon. You have a frenzy state, you switch to it, unload a magazine, switch back to your main weapon or your other third weapon. You're not planning to use it for very long. That's when you start getting some really nice value out of weak point expansion, Dope and Minergic Activate, and even things like Payout, which I haven't found a single impact build that can use Payout effectively, just because you lose so much DPS by running it that you end up not being able to use it. But in this case, unlike the Perforator, which scaled really well with Dope and Minergic Activate, the Blue Beetle can actually be run as a quick swap weapon using weak point expansion. So in this case, action and reaction is going to be your best mod. We use that as a benchmark and scale all the mods on the left side of the screen relative to that. Weak point expansion becomes your next best. Mental focus is still quite good for this because you can still stack that up as you shoot. Dopaminergic Activate is just below mental focus because it's not as much of a crit weapon as the Perforator was. Then Rifling Reinforcement, Elemental Conductor, all of those. So we're going to run weak point expansion, action and reaction, Rifling Reinforcement, fire rate up. Then we want all crit and we want all weak points. So have aiming, weak point sight, target detection, better concentration, and better insight, plus our elemental weakness, which is always going to be very good. Keep in mind that the re-rolled stats on weapons, the values of those are different based on the round type that it fires. So for example, you may get 3,000 damage versus Colossi on your Thunder Cage as a general round weapon, but if you roll the exact same stat, bonus damage versus Colossi on a launcher, it's going to be 30,000. And in the case of Scout Rifles, you can get it up to 4,700, 5,000 on that damage. The flat damage is as well for the flat elemental for that, and then like 10,000 for the bonus first attack. So you get a ton of extra damage because it is a different kind of weapon, a different selection, a different reroll. So you'll notice a different weighting here above for the reroll priority on the top as well. So if you wanted to run this as a quick swap weapon, the impact weapons are great for this. Again, you're not really worried about reload. You can even swap out better insight for better weapon weight. This allows you to swap to the weapon and off the weapon faster, which means that you're limiting the amount of time that you're not shooting. So you have your main weapon, say you're running with Enduring Legacy or something, you shoot, and then a frenzy state happens, or a weak point opens up, or someone gets staggered or stunned, or an elite or a commander enemy in an infiltration stands still for a second. Pull out your Blue Beetle, wham, 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 unload the whole magazine, and instead of reloading, you just swap back to your other weapon and keep going with that main weapon. That playstyle allows you to increase the potential burst, but again, if you run it this way without the things that we mentioned in the previous build, and you keep it out for more than one magazine, the damage is going to be lower overall. So if you want to just use Blue Beetle for multiple magazines to use up your impact rounds, I recommend running this build, but if you want to run it as a quick swap weapon as an option for your playstyle, you can work in weak point expansion and run with swapping, use that for that kind of build. But that's the weapon overall. I think this is one of the coolest looking weapons in the game, super reliable, super fun, and I think honestly with how many like specific phases we have to hit something pinpoint, having a weapon like this in your arsenal makes things a lot more enjoyable and a lot more interesting and a lot more fun. But let me know what you think about the weapon down below. Let me know what you think, what weapon we should cover next. We're still working our way through all of it. I know a lot of people are asking for Enduring Legacy. We're working towards that, but this is a fun one. I like this one. Yeah, pick up the Blue Beetle today. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people. And don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.